I've been thinking it's amazing how protests and political activism have shaped our world. It's
Yeah,
like they're the heartbeat of democracy.
absolutely. So, where do you think it all started?
Well, if we go back to the Boston Tea Party in 1773, that
Right.
protest against British taxation led to the American Revolution.
Oh, yeah, that was a real game changer.
Exactly. And then the French Revolution overthrew the monarchy, introducing democracy, but also chaos.
So, early activism showed that mass mobilization could challenge power structures, but at a cost.
Precisely. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
Protests can bring about change, but also instability.
and some movements were suppressed, right?
Yes, sometimes governments clamped down, delaying
Right.
change. But overall, these early protests helped define modern democracy and human rights.
Moving into the 20th century, labor movements were huge, weren't they?
Absolutely. Workers protested for fair wages and better conditions,
Yeah.
led to unionization and labor protections.
And the civil rights movement? Talk about impactful.
Definitely. The Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 sparked nationwide protests against segregation. It pressured Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
So peaceful protests brought real change.
Exactly. Nonviolent movements often succeed because they gain public sympathy.
Yeah.
But, sometimes protests turn violent, leading to backlash.
Right, like the anti-Vietnam War protests had their moments.
Yeah, and some argued that violent actions undermine the message, but
Right.
others felt that escalation was necessary to be heard.
Do you think violence is ever justified in protests?
That's a tough one. I mean, the American Revolution was violent and it led to independence. But peaceful protests tend to be more effective nowadays.
So, fast forward to modern times. How has social media changed activism?
Oh, it's been a game changer. Social media allows movements to organize quickly and reach millions.
Yeah.
It's like giving everyone a global platform.
Like the Arab Spring, it was largely coordinated through Facebook and Twitter.
Exactly. And movements like Black Lives Matter used viral videos and hashtags to bring attention to issues.
Right.
It gives a voice to marginalized communities.
But isn't there a downside with misinformation spreading easily?
Definitely. Misinformation can spread like wildfire. And some argue that hashtag activism is just performative.
So in-person protests are still important then?
Absolutely. While online activism raises awareness, physical protests apply direct pressure. They're both
Yeah.
essential.
Recent protests like the Women's March and George Floyd demonstrations have led to policy changes, haven't they?
Yes, they forced governments and corporations to respond.
Right.
But protesters also risk backlash, like arrests or violence.
Especially in countries where protests are suppressed.
Exactly. In authoritarian regimes, activists face censorship and repression, whereas democracies allow more freedom of assembly.
Do you think protests always create chaos, or can they coexist with stable democracies?
I believe they can coexist. Protests are a fundamental part of democracy.
Yeah.
They provide a way for citizens to express dissent.
But sometimes they can be divisive and disrupt social harmony.
True, but without them, important issues might be ignored.
Right.
It's about finding balance.
It's like tuning a radio to find the right frequency. Too much static, and you miss the message.
Exactly. Great analogy.
Thanks.
Protests need to be heard without causing unnecessary chaos.
So, looking ahead, do you think we'll see more protests?
With global issues like climate change and social justice, I think so. Activism is
Yeah.
becoming more prevalent worldwide.
Can social media activism fully replace street protests?
I don't think so. Online activism raises awareness, but street protests exert tangible pressure. Both have their
Right.
roles.
How can protests be more effective in the future?
By staying peaceful and well organized. Combining activism with legal action and political engagement is key.
So it's not just about protesting, but also about changing policies through the system.
Exactly. Activism is a tool to bring issues to light, but lasting change comes from sustained efforts. Voting, lobbying, all of that.
Makes sense. So protests have power, but also limits.
Right. They can shape history, but they need to be part of a larger strategy.
Exactly.
It's up to us to use them wisely.
Well, this has been enlightening. Thanks for the great conversation.
Thank you. Always a pleasure discussing these important topics. Until next
Absolutely.
time.